Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session, Digital Bridge in Virtue of the Education. And I would like to address actually the stage to our moderator, Vipul.
Thank you, Almira, and good evening, everybody. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you today, virtually, as the world, as a new world it is. And I'm absolutely delighted that I have a very esteemed panel with me, a collection of great British organizations, as well as one of the leading association of British EdTech companies. So without further ado, I should just introduce myself very quickly. My name is Vipul Bhargava. I've been in EdTech for a very long time, and I'm a specialist on EdTech with the Department for International Trade. So I'll probably just get each of our panelists to quickly introduce themselves, probably starting with Caroline. Caroline, over to you.
Good evening. Thank you. It's an honour to be here virtually. I'm Caroline Wright. I'm Director General of BESA, the British Educational Suppliers Association. We are the industry body for UK's education industry. We quality check and vet UK educational suppliers to make sure that they comply with a strict code of conduct. We check their financial viability, as well as making sure that they have a strong track record of working with schools, colleges and universities. We do that so that governments, schools and teachers around the world can trust and buy from BESA companies who are kite marked with confidence from us. Our BESA member companies, which includes all of the commercial providers on our panel today, account for about 80% of the value of the UK educational suppliers market. They provide all the types of educational equipment that you could imagine, from PE, school furniture, special education resources, textbooks, and all the way through to educational technology, which we're here to talk about today, and more than half of our companies specialise in. As well as my day job at BESA, I also co-chair the British Government's EdTech Leadership Group, which is a group of educators, academics and education industry that advises the British Government on their educational technology plans and strategies. And that allows me to have an understanding of some of the helpful ways that government can use digital technology to improve teaching and learning outcomes in schools, colleges and universities. Thank you.
Thank you. Should we go to Greg next?
Thank you. My name is Greg Watson. I'm the Chief Executive of GL Education. We are the leading provider of formative and diagnostic assessments to schools all around the world, both public and private. So we provide highly reliable, highly standardized measures of the characteristics of individual students. And that's based on very large scale trialing and statistical standardization. The measurements that we provide to schools fall into three main categories, and they're mostly delivered online. Firstly, we provide measures of ability, both overall ability, but also different kinds of ability for each student. And that enables teachers and the students themselves to develop an understanding of their strengths and weaknesses in different areas. Secondly, we provide progress measures around areas of the curriculum, and that enables teachers and their students to understand the progress of that student against a large population of similar students, and that can be both in their own country and also around the world. And then the third type of assessment that we provide measure barriers to learning. And those measures enable teachers and students to understand why a student might not be learning successfully. And that will typically be because of an underlying issue about engagement or confidence in learning, or perhaps because of a special educational need or a specific learning difficulty. And those three types of measurement across ability, progress, and barriers can be brought together using sophisticated analytics to provide a rich 360-degree view of an individual student to enable a very personalized approach to their teaching and learning. We provide those assessments and the analytics and the services that surround them to schools in over 100 countries, both public and private, and that includes a large number of schools in the UK, many international schools, US school districts, and most recently we've begun to localize our tests so that they can be used in school systems and in other languages around the world. And most notably, we now have some of our tests available in Mandarin Chinese and in Arabic.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Greg. Jon, over to you.
Hi there. My name is Jon Smith. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Pobble. Pobble provides the best tools for teaching writing in schools. Everything from fantastic curriculum-aligned content through to tools to help engage children in the process of writing, providing tools such as peer-to-peer feedback and the ability to embed formative assessment in the classroom, through to also tools that help with the assessment and moderation of assessment judgments in writing, which are particularly challenging due to the kind of subjective nature of writing. We combine together, a huge bank of children's handwritten work that becomes the kind of basis for planning lessons. So you can really see what good writing looks like from children all over the world. Pobble's won multiple awards, things like the BETT Awards, which is a major sort of global award in the UK, the GES Awards in Dubai. But we're also one of a small number of companies that are actually funded by the Department for Education to develop our products further. So we've been awarded a grant particularly focused on formative assessment and how Pobble can support formative assessment in the classroom. We began in the UK. We have a large reach of schools in the UK, but we're now just beginning to work with many more schools and teachers in various different countries. And so we're really excited to be sharing our mission to really engage and inspire children to become confident and excited writers. Thank you.
Thanks, Jon. Very helpful. Mohit, over to you.
Hi there. My name is Mohit Midha. I'm the CEO and co-founder for a company called Manga High. We're here based in London in the UK. We're a digital resource to help students learn maths and coding. We do so by offering our product through games and gamification, and also use artificial intelligence. So on our platform, teachers can browse the curriculum in the country they are in. So if they're in America, they would be using the Common Core, or if they are in Mexico, they would be using their own local curriculum in Spanish. They find the activities that the students should be learning and they want to be teaching and can assign them to the students. Students have their own logins. They work in their own one-on-one environment. They could be on any device. They don't need a fancy laptop or a desktop. They could even be on a cell phone. So this is why Manga High has really shot up or gone through the roof during the pandemic. And it's been as we know, distance learning has really gone through the roof during this time. And teachers can track the analytics of how well the students are doing, who needs help and who needs support. So the product comes with a whole package of assessments, formative assessments, content, games, and covers all the way content from kindergarten to grade 10.
Very helpful. Thanks, Mohit. And finally, to Rowan.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Rowan Kennedy. I'm country director for the British Council in Kazakhstan. The British Council have been working in Kazakhstan since 1994. I've been here myself 6 years, since 2014. At the British Council, I suppose we are an education product provider. We deliver English lessons. We do English teaching. We've over 80 years of experience in English language education, and work with over 100 million learners worldwide every year. We do English language testing. We're a partner, one of 3 partners in the IELTS test, which is the gold standard English language test used by immigration agencies and universities across the world. We also do other English tests, including APTIS, which is a test of our own. We work with governments to develop solutions for their education challenges, particularly around teaching and learning English and improving the quality of teaching and learning English. But we also have, as well as sort of offering education products, we also have an enormous free offer. So we have our Learn English online resources to help teachers and learners around the world improve their English. We also work closely with DIT and colleagues across the UK government to help the UK sector gain access to the markets where we're based. We have a unique global network. We work in over 115 countries worldwide. And so we work as well to support UK companies to share their expertise and share their learning and gain opportunities across those markets.
That's great. Thank you, Rowan, and thank you everyone for introducing yourselves. So as you've all heard, we've got a collection of organizations who've got a breadth of experience, right from STEM, coding, English assessment, and of course English language training, and also Caroline, who sits across multiple organizations. So really, what we're going to try and do is try and bring in experience from all these wonderful people. But of course, I think you can also ask questions as we go live. I will get the questions from you. So feel free to ask any questions that you have from the panel. To start off with, just to kickstart the conversation, what I'm quite curious about is how have British companies like yourselves responded to COVID? What's the biggest change that has come about? So why don't we start again, perhaps with Caroline again? If you can give us a sort of more from an industry perspective, how you think British organizations have responded.
Sure. Well, I think it's worth pointing out that since day one, UK companies have been working with schools, thousands of schools across the world, from China, where the crisis first hit, to the ASEAN region, and they've been learning and adapting and being able to find ways to help support and improve. So it's been a sort of a rapid learning cycle for UK companies, and they've been able to offer that advice in different countries as they started to plan and experience their lockdown and closure periods. I think from my perspective, looking across the sector, this is something I'm particularly proud of. Within BESA, we've seen our member companies offering, adapting and offering going the extra mile, offering free and subsidised products and services to schools and colleges around the world. We've looked at the value of that, and amazingly, since the end of February alone, so March onwards, we've seen UK companies making available additional support valued at £30 million to schools across the world, and that's actually 3% of the annual UK turnover for those companies, so that's not an insubstantial amount. And we've been very pleased to be able to put those products out there so that schools around the world can look at them in their own time. And if there's actually a platform we can share later, but learned.org.uk, so that schools can see that British advice. I think three key areas of support where UK providers have been talking internationally about where they can support schools in a lot of focus is teacher training. So in the UK, we have been having a national clap along, cheering our key workers, so teachers, doctors and nurses, because of them going the extra mile. We need to invest in supporting teachers as we move forward, and we've got the UK companies who can help embed that knowledge as we start going back to normal. So teacher training, curriculum content, our providers have been massively supporting schools around the world, English language and maths particularly, that schools continue to tell us the importance of supporting them in that area. And finally, assessment, both high stakes assessment and ongoing formative assessment, really helping educators identify and bridge the gaps and the losses and delays that might have appeared in learning. We've got providers ready to sort of hold the hand of schools and governments to help them through those periods. So I think those are the key areas that I've seen schools, our providers have been supporting the education system with.
Excellent. Thank you, Caroline. I don't know, Greg, do you want to sort of talk a bit about assessment, how that's changed for you?
So it's as we've been through a very dramatic change, but schools have been through perhaps a more dramatic change in locking down so completely and so quickly and at very short notice. And I think we've been able to support schools in three important ways. The first thing is actually we've been able to support schools to just use what they already had. Many schools that work well with us already had access to a good body of data about their students. And perhaps it's not data that they'd used in the immediate past, but that data was still available, and that data is still very significant in terms of understanding perhaps which students might be more at risk in this situation, which students might need more to make use of the data that we've already provided to them. And we actually have a small group of former teachers who've been very good users of our assessments in schools, who now work with us, and they're available to schools to use for advice and guidance as to how to get more out of that data. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we actually moved to making our tests available at home where schools wanted it. Our schools are mostly used, although they're available online, they're mostly used in a school, and they're mostly, more importantly, the results are mostly used with a teacher sitting next to a student. And so this was a very different sort of setup, but we were able to make the tests run at home. We ran, some of our reading tests actually ran in very large numbers in the home. So on the one hand, we were able to ensure continuity for schools to still have those tests and the data, but also we had some very good learning out of that. And we've actually just completed an evaluation of that first large use online. We've discovered actually there are some important factors around how parents behave when tests take place in the home. Parents don't understand why schools test. They often think the test is too hard for the child. We had some parents complained about one of our adaptive tests forcing the children to attempt a question they couldn't do, that is actually an important feature of a test. So we'll recycle that, and I think the next time we use tests in that way, there will be some additional support that we'll be able to provide. And then I think the most important thing is that we're helping schools prepare for reopening and for catch-up. Many schools, even though September is still three months away, many schools now are very concerned that when pupils return, they won't understand as well as they normally do what level those students are at, how confident they're feeling. There's a real concern about equity, that some students may have fallen further behind because of social disadvantage, because of particular learning difficulties. So many schools are saying that they want to do a more extensive program of assessment as the students return, so that they can create a new baseline for those students to start from, and then they can focus the efforts of the schools on those students that need it most.
Yes, and Greg, I think what you touched upon is a very important point. One of the concerns which we've all been reading about is the growing difference in education level based on income, right? So,
yes,
of course, unfortunate, whether there's less internet or there's less access to devices, children are suffering more. So, would you say that that GL can actually help identify that gap and close the gap to solve that big problem?
Yes, well, I mean, the beauty of the kind of assessment that we provide is because every piece of data we provide is benchmarked to a large population of students that we've tested previously. We can provide, we can differentiate two different factors really, which is that it may be that a whole cohort has fallen behind, and that's very likely that there will be some sort of learning gap for every student who's been at home. Schools will be able to assess how big that loss has been, and therefore they know what the size of the challenge is to close that gap again, perhaps over the next year or so. So that's at the cohort level. And then at the individual student level, we'll be able to differentiate those students who've fallen relatively further behind compared to children of a similar age, of a similar background. And because we work with so many schools, I think we'll very quickly get some very good intelligence actually about what the size of that gap has been generally, and then how big the variations are for individual students or individual schools. And I'm hopeful that we can actually contribute to quite a large research effort in education as well, which perhaps will inform the way that schools work over the next year or so.
Excellent, excellent. Thanks. Jon, if I can just come to you after that. And of course, you help with English language. A key part of English is, of course, is the whole reading part of it. So how has this changed for you? How's COVID impacted you? And what you do?
Yeah, it was very interesting when we first kind of understood that schools were going to be locking down and that this was, looking really quite serious. We simply got together a focus group of teachers and asked them, what do you need right now? What is really important? And they basically, two things came back. One was that high quality content that was, curriculum aligned, age specific, all the things that, we pride ourselves on building was going to be absolutely key. And the second thing was that has to be accessible in school, at home, wherever, and even potentially without sort of additional logins and that type of thing for children. So we very quickly kind of pivoted that part of the platform to basically make it possible that you as a teacher could find a lesson on Pobble very quickly to cover your requirements, and you could share that with all of your pupils, whether that's at home or in school. without them actually having to log in, simply by a link. And this proved to be incredibly popular. And we pretty much enabled anyone to be able to sign up for Pobble. Any teacher anywhere in the world could literally go onto the Pobble homepage, put their email address in, register as a teacher, and we had a kind of free trial period at the start. And we had a remarkable sort of increase, something like a 7-fold increase of daily active users in the space of about 2 weeks, which was, it was a good challenge from a technical standpoint to see how our platform, just sort of took all of that additional traffic. Thankful to say it worked very well. So we've kind of gone from, essentially it's the same approach, it's the same solution, but it's just scaled up, and there's been those few tweaks. Another change that we made that was really important was we enabled teachers to be able to print for the first time. We're a digital tool, which is dynamic lessons with exercises within them. You didn't have the ability to print those lessons before or make a PDF. And actually that was one of the biggest things that people fed back to us, is they really need printable resources so that they can give those to people that don't have access to internet at home, or they've got one device amongst 2 or 3 children, or that sort of challenge. And so really simple things like that, adding a print button made a huge difference to the experience of our users.
Thanks, John. I think what you touch upon is something we will talk about. Is we of course can't assume that that internet connectivity is fantastic in all parts of of the world. So if you do have experience in helping offline students as well, I think that'll be quite valuable for, I'm sure, a lot of people in the audience, etc. So that's very helpful, John. Good to know. Mohit, you obviously mathematics coding is a key part. We've seen a lot of growth in that, a lot of venture funding going into coding products. Do you want to talk a little bit about how Manga High has responded in this time?
Sure. So we were one of the companies that Caroline mentioned, made our resources available for free. And just like John, we had a surge in demand. I think because we are in more than 60 countries, we could see the pandemic or the virus sort of spreading from Asia towards the UK. We had our own Cobra meetings in the UK and saying, okay, Hong Kong is shut, Vietnam is shut, now UAE is shut. I think it was inevitable it was going to hit the UK. So we were a little bit more prepared. And we had similar infrastructure challenges. We had to really scale up. We had more than 10,000 schools that signed up to our product in the last 3 months. I would say it's not over for us. We're still battling with the pandemic in Brazil. We're still battling with schools coming back in the UK. So now, for example, in my son's school, children are in bubbles. Schools are open and they have to stay with 7 other children. So there's a bubble of 8 students and 1 teacher. So if any of them gets infected, the whole bubble has to isolate. So we've had to improvise. Now we allow functionality on our product where instead of, like, we already allowed teachers to differentiate and say, okay, you can assign activities to students or to the whole class, but now you can also do it at a bubble level. So you can say, if this bubble is isolating, I can easily transition them to remote learning and learn from home, as opposed to creating more work for teachers. So anything and everything we could do to help the teachers, because they were the ones who need the clap, as Caroline said. They've been working really hard, and I think teachers are the ones who've been the heroes. And as a parent who has seen a child at home, trying to educate the child, trying to be a parent, trying to run the company at the same time, it's just the appreciation for teachers have gone through the roof. So we've also had to modify our product in certain ways. Like before, teachers would give out logins to students in class, they would cut it up. But now that they're remote, like how do you distribute 1,000 logins? So we've had to come up with technical solutions for that. It's been a very interesting journey, and I think it's really put EdTech on steroids, not just Manga High. I think the whole industry, I think Caroline would agree, it's suddenly become an essential part of education as opposed to a nice to have. So all the teachers who are sitting on the sidelines thinking, yeah, EdTech is interesting, I might use it someday, have now started to appreciate the things that they couldn't do before, like all the marking they don't have to do, all the time that is saved from using EdTech, and students are more engaged. I think one thing that gets sometimes underappreciated is the socio-emotional aspect of online learning, because we talk about equity gap and we talk about learning sort of grades, etc., and students falling behind. I think we don't sometimes realize the impact the trauma has caused on the emotional well-being of the children. And with Manga High, we can see they really appreciate competing with their friends online, seeing the other students online. They still feel part of the community. Even though they're at home, they couldn't do that without EdTech. So I can see the children are competing with their classmates. They are collaborating with their friends while being at home. So as we're doing with the call right now, I think technology has really reduced or lessened the impact of the pandemic on education.
Yeah. No, I think it's a good point. And I think one thing which you sort of brought to the table that I think everybody is sort of talked a little bit about is traditionally, parents send their kids to school and it's a teacher-student relationship. Now they're at home. And I think, Greg, you talked about it as well. There is now a three-way. It's like parents are getting involved in some shape or form, right? So they're a piece in the jigsaw now. So this new world, where parents need to be involved a little bit, they probably need to play a bit of the teacher's role depending on how old the child is. How's that changed the way you're thinking about your product, right? Is a new role of parent playing any role in how you're thinking about it?
Yeah, definitely for us. Yeah. So that's a change that had already happened for us to a degree. Many of our assessments output the data in one format, which is more suitable for use with parents. So the perhaps will be a more sophisticated presentation of the data for teachers or for senior leaders in schools, but we'll have a simplified version of that teachers can use with parents if they like. And as a parent, I have been in my child's own school and I've been presented with my own assessment data on one of my children, but in a way that makes sense on a parent consultation evening. And that's something that started some time ago. And in fact, we're actually sponsoring someone to do a PhD in this area at the moment to try and understand what the potential advantages, but also the potential downsides could be of bringing parents more into that relationship. So that's nothing new. I think you're right, though, Vipul, that with students at home, then parents have been drawn much more immediately into that. I think what we've realised is that, particularly in assessment, which is to most parents, assessment is a scary thing. It's a thing that at school that you hoped you didn't have to do. It was filled with terror and grades and getting university places. And that fear can get in the way. So actually, I think what we've learned, even in the last 3 months, is that actually parents need more explanation. If you're going to use assessment, parent needs to understand what's the point of the assessment, how is the information going to be used. They needed explaining that not all assessment is an exam, not all assessment leads to a grade, and not all assessment is going to spoil your child's life chances. Much assessment is just to help the teacher understand better where your child is and how they can teach them better. And often it's so that the child themselves can understand better. How are they learning? Where are they succeeding? Where do they need to address gaps? So I think it's probably another big step on a road that we were already on, but I think it has thrown up some challenges that we're now addressing about making sure that parents are well informed so they can be properly engaged and engaged in a supportive way.
Rowan, if I can bring you in a little bit on British Council, obviously your business is slightly different from some of the colleagues here because you obviously got a physical test center business as well. Do you want to talk a little something about how it's affected British Council, probably not just in Kazakhstan but just globally as well, and how you're responding to that?
Yeah, so I mean, yes, we do have a sort of a physical test center business now. That I think anyway, before the pandemic, we were moving more towards tech solutions to that. So, for example, whereas IELTS tests have traditionally been delivered with pen and paper, we've been moving for the past few years to delivering them through computers. You've got right now, most of the time when you take an IELTS test, you've got a face-to-face speaking interview to judge your level of spoken English. We're moving that online, and that had been sort of starting before the pandemic. It's now, of course, accelerating, and we're doing the same with some of the other tests we do as well, such as the APTIS test. So, we've definitely that process has been sped up. Similarly, teaching online. I mean, we were starting to do more and more English teaching online. That's been sped up by the pandemic, and we were able to, here in Kazakhstan, but around the world as well, we were able to transfer the vast majority of our teaching online very, very quickly. I think some of the other things that we've been doing in response to the pandemic specifically is, as colleagues have been doing, we've been starting to share some of our resources that were behind a paywall. We've been starting to make them free. We've been starting to make them more available. And we've also been starting to both kind of locally, but also on a global scale, work out what we can do to support teachers. So, for example, here in Kazakhstan, we're doing quite a lot of work to try and support teachers who are increasingly recording lessons and uploading them on YouTube, to support them to develop better lessons, to link them back to some of the resources that are available online, both provided by us and provided by others. But then on a global level as well, we're doing some work to try and, some research really, to try and pull together some of the lessons that have been learnt by ministries of education across the world, and amalgamate them and share them to sort of almost come up with a kind of best practice toolkit, again with a particular focus on teaching and learning English. The other thing I'd say is, just in response to some of the questions about parents' involvement in education, from my experience here in Kazakhstan, from our experience, that's really, really relevant here, because certainly as compared to the UK, parents play a really big role, and have actually always traditionally played a really big role in their children's education, in some of the decision making, you know, around what subjects they study, much more so than I think you might normally expect in the UK context. So I think that has been important here, and I think will only get more important as things develop with the pandemic.
Yeah, thank you, thanks, Rowan. And I think something which certainly we've talked about quite a bit is, you know, when you go to Asia, and certainly Southeast Asia, you see there are a lot more B2C EdTech businesses, right? Because it's, you know, it's just quite common for parents to make purchasing decisions on products. You know, whereas when you come to the UK, it's actually, you know, we're slightly more B2B businesses, but now sort of having to do more, you know, more and more B2C stuff. And that probably is not a bad segue into, I think what would be quite helpful for the audience to also understand is what you're seeing internationally in some of the markets that you operate in. Like, how are you seeing different markets react to this pandemic? So I don't know, perhaps we just mix up the order a little bit, but whoever wants to go first, you know, are there any particular governments or ministries that you've seen? If you just put your hand up, you can go for it. Mo, did you have a hand up there?
Yeah, so I'm happy to go first. I think we are seeing the response, and it's quite interesting, very different from different markets. I think the lowest level of response has been in Australia, where they didn't need to do too much. They were already well prepared. Most schools in Australia have infrastructure, they have resources. So we didn't see the government over there needing to do too much. Now we're working with the New South Wales Department of Education to provide our resources to Sydney schools. But I think that was a little bit late in the day. With US, we felt like they have the infrastructure, but the government could have done more. I think they left it to the districts, individual districts, to do different things. And I think that could be also said more widely about US and how they have handled the pandemic. It's been a bit different. Whereas in the UK, we saw a more concerted effort from the Department of Education. Like Manga High was one of the resources recommended for all the English schools. And I think that's as far as the UK government can go. They can't endorse a particular product. Whereas in Mexico, they have endorsed products. They have made a portal, and they put Manga High on there for the whole country to use. And we've offered that for free for a period of time. In Brazil, we are looking at some state level deals where we're talking about 1 million students, 1.6 million students in Sao Paulo, etc., which is the government is being involved. And then you see in other markets like Peru, where the government can't do very much, because the infrastructure doesn't exist. So Peru is looking at buying 1 million tablets for the students through an emergency tender. And also, meanwhile, we're supporting them with a TV strategy, with a broadcast strategy for reaching out to the students who would not be otherwise able to see the Manga High games or the Manga High math content. They can now see it being used on TV. So there is at least some continuity in learning. So we've seen like a really vast range of responses from different governments, but I think the governments around the world have come together, or when I say come together with the teachers to try and find a solution. But I think anytime the governments are involved, it takes a longer while, then it can happen really quickly. So for example, the tender in Peru is being questioned, and so things are taking a bit longer than we would have liked, but it's happening.
Excellent. Anybody else who wanted to come in on that? On what you're noticing across?
I'll happily comment. I would think. I think broadly, I've seen the world has sort of fallen into two major categories. I would say, a slight simplification, but I would say where schools and school systems were already very well equipped digitally, they were able to achieve a very high degree of continuity. as in, even if students went home, they were able to continue learning. I would say large parts of the US were already well invested in EdTech. Private schools around the world, particularly sort of higher end private schools where digital learning was actually already a core part of the curriculum. I think we saw a lot of continuity very quickly. I think elsewhere, if schools and school systems weren't in that situation, then you very quickly saw a wide variation. We talked about social equity earlier. I've seen in the UK a big disparity between a smaller number of schools that were very well equipped and a large number of schools that I think were underinvested still in technology and have had to invent new ways of working very quickly. I would say across all of that, though, I think there's one common challenge that everybody now has and everybody's talking about, which is that it's going to be hard for a while to know whether schools are performing well, because many of the measures that would normally tell you whether a school is performing well, that's whether it's for the school's own measurement, whether it's for a school inspection body to measure, whether it's for a local accountability system. Much of the data that normally populates those performance management systems is now missing. The end of year tests won't be there. The routine collection of data from teaching and learning won't be there. And I say more than anything else, the single most common conversation we're having with anybody anywhere at the moment is, how are we going to know whether the schools are doing a good job when everybody comes back? We're actually going to have to find some data that we don't currently have and piece together some intelligent view about, on average, how well a school's now doing, and then who's doing better than that and who's doing worse than that. Because if we don't know that, we don't know which schools then need most help to get back on their feet.
Yeah, true. Excellent. Caroline, you must have seen, I think we worked together on a few of these things where obviously, some of the governments have come to the UK government as well, and we've come up with a list of organizations that we think, can potentially help. We did that in Vietnam, we did that in China. What else are you seeing, Caroline?
I think, as Mohit and Greg have talked about, we do have some governments that come to us and say, look, we'd like to share thoughts, ideas, learn from each other. And we're really happy to sort of explain what we understand from the UK context and then connect governments with key providers with the expertise to talk in depth. We've been doing that with the Belgians, different Chinese regional state governments and so on. So that's going on. And I think actually that's where I think the education market is really collaborative in that way. I don't know a single company that isn't willing to talk about and share thoughts and ideas along those ways. So we're doing a lot of that. And I think actually, the companies we've got here are the experts on their own individual products and the conversations they're having. But really, interestingly, I think we're also using this opportunity of getting used to talking and working in a different way and more online, to actually look at how we can do much more to connect the individual companies with countries and state governments and schools around the world. And I know we've been working very closely with the Department for International Trade, yourself, Vipul, and others around the world to see if we can arrange online trade missions. We're obviously all not going anywhere anytime soon. So it's use this opportunity while we are all in our spare rooms and around the world to actually learn from each other. So we're looking to arranging some virtual trade missions. We've had a couple of very successful ones. I know we've had a Saudi trade mission, and we're looking to, as we reach the autumn, to use those opportunities to connect companies with educationists around the world to be able to share advice and thoughts and guidance, and hopefully make those connections where, in a more strategic way, than if we happen to bump into each other at an international event and so on. So I think that could be really constructive and potentially change the way we work more over the long term on that front.
Yeah. Rowan, from your perspective, obviously being in Kazakhstan and sort of being the British Council, so how do you see that bridge between UK and Kazakhstan potentially working? What do you think are the potential needs in Kazakhstan?
It's a good question. It was interesting to hear Mohit mention Australia at the start, because quite often when people who've never been to Kazakhstan ask me what's Kazakhstan like, actually almost Australia is one of the countries it's most similar to, in that there's a huge geography. There's a population that's very, very dispersed geographically. I suppose the other thing is very strong, very big mineral wealth. But you know, Kazakhstan was always going to be a really interesting market and a really big opportunity for EdTech because of the vast geographic scale, because of the very low population density. And because it's got a young population. And even before COVID-19, even before the pandemic, the government had made the development of human capital and reform of the education system a priority. So if you look at any of the government strategic documents from the past few years, whether it's kind of Strategy 2050 or the 100 Concrete Steps document, which sort of lay out the government strategy for national development, they all include development of knowledge and professional skills, development of human capital. And there have been a number of steps that have been taken in recent years, such as the provision of internet to all schools across the country, that kind of move in that direction. So, you know, even before the pandemic, there are huge opportunities and I suppose huge challenges here for EdTech. But the government response since COVID has been to really kind of focus in on this. So the president said in a speech in mid-May, that, you know, that they will really be prioritising making education more flexible, accelerating the introduction of modern distance learning technologies, reimagining the content of educational programmes, preparing teachers to deal with those new technologies. So actually, you know, I think there is huge potential here. There are challenges. I mean, we have a little bit of experience, for example, with remote English teaching into classrooms in Atirau, in the Atirau Oblast in the west of the country, that have shown that, you know, sometimes the internet works really well, sometimes it doesn't. It's shown that, you know, sometimes teachers are well prepared to deal with this kind of new technology, sometimes they aren't. So the challenges are there, but so is the potential.
Excellent. Thank you, Rowan. So instead of me asking questions, I think let's take one from the audience. And one of the questions from the audience is that we've talked about UK, we've talked about international markets. Obviously, these solutions don't necessarily work in its own form in all the markets. So are these organizations able to adapt and be flexible for the local market? I'm assuming this is with reference to Kazakhstan, of course. So I'll let any of you just sort of talk about how you've perhaps done it elsewhere, but how flexible can you to be adapted to a local context? So I don't know who wants to go. I guess, John, perhaps you want to start off?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's quite interesting. If you look at writing is a very specific area of the curriculum, which is what we specialize in. And it was interesting during the sort of pandemic and school closures, there was some research done that sort of suggested that more than half of teachers believe at primary level that the hardest hit subject will be writing, because it is very tricky to teach at home. And so we've had a real, you know, surge in interest as a result of that from all over the world. I think in terms of kind of how we can be relevant to any international market, of course, lots of people are focused on teaching English as an additional language, and writing is a key part of that, particularly when you think about people wanting to come and study or you know, be employed in other countries. They need to have a good grasp of written English. And so, just for example, the fact that all of our content is editable and you know, tailored to whatever context it needs to be, and the platform itself is very visual, so it's all about trying to help people understand how to access that, even if English isn't their first language. And we also have this incredible bank of children's handwritten work. So part of the sort of process in Pobble is about publishing online. So we have, you know, perhaps the largest bank of children's handwritten work written by children all over the world. And so that's a wonderful resource for other children to learn from, to see, well, okay, what does a native English speaker write about when they think about elephants, or, you know, whatever the sort of subject matter is. And I think another really interesting element in the pandemic is it pushed a lot of teacher training online. So we used to have representatives in country that would go to schools and go and deliver training, or we'd go into a country for a week and bring together the teachers in an area and run training. Now we run daily webinars. So every day we have 3 or 4 webinars training teachers about how to use Pobble. And they last 20 minutes or so, and we have, you know, hundreds every single day from all over the world on those webinars. And so again, for a Kazakhstani teacher, you could register on the Pobble platform entirely online, get onboarded, get going straight away. You could then attend a webinar tomorrow to obtain the relevant teacher training to understand how to use it. And so I think, the accessibility of platforms such as Pobble now are so much better for new international markets, which is, really, really exciting for us.
Greg, I mean, when it comes to assessment, I guess assessments are usually quite local as well. So I don't know, how do you adapt to other markets?
Well, so I think I said when I introduced myself at the start, we've had our assessments used in over 100 countries already. So starting originally from the UK, which was our base, and our products are originally very much built with a British school in mind, but they've proved to be pretty adaptable. Actually, they've moved pretty comfortably out into international schools, private schools worldwide, moved out into US public school districts. But we've, last 2-3 years, we've moved beyond that now. So we've begun to build versions in other languages so they can be used in other school systems. And our main tests have actually, translated, and I don't just mean translated, but adapted to local context as well, very comfortably in China with through a large pilot that we did with the Chinese government. Now moving into Arab countries, where we're expecting we'll have a large scale pilot with one Middle Eastern country by the end of this year. I think our tests have been translated into 8 or 9 other languages at different times. Also, by the way, now including US English, which is different to English. So that's had its own challenges. So at one level, we've been able to adapt, change language, and slightly adapt for context. On the other hand, much of the benefit of these assessments is actually the huge pool of data that sits behind them, which means that actually, because the tests don't fundamentally change, you can make comparisons across borders. And one of the reasons we were asked to go in and pilot in China was that actually some researchers in China were keen to use data from elsewhere in the world to find out something they couldn't find out about the characteristics of Chinese students. And we were delighted to discover the test itself was reliable. The test worked equally well with Chinese students as anywhere else. But also we were then able to map that small amount of new data onto a large body of historical data that we had from the UK and international schools and elsewhere, and actually bring an insight into somewhere like China that otherwise couldn't have existed. And I think we've been doing that in a number of countries now.
Sounds good. I guess. Sorry, go ahead, Cara. Sorry.
No, I'd just like to add. I mean, actually, if you think about the size of Great Britain and the United Kingdom, we're actually a pretty small country. We have around 8 million students every year. There are actually more students learning and using British expertise products and British curriculum resources and assessment around the world than in the UK. And I think that's one of the strengths. We can look at what works in the UK, we can adapt, and we can use the latest techniques. But then I think what British companies are very good at doing is working with local systems and states to make sure that they fit within the political, social and cultural contexts of their own markets, and then using them moving on. So I think that's something that we have done over many years by the natures of geography to start with.
Yeah. I think one thing, of course, very important when you adapt to another country is, of course, the curriculum, which I think, you've all sort of said you're across curriculum. The other is language, which I think, again, we can manage it. But the third thing, very important, is cost. And there is a perception that British products are expensive, right? So which is why I think we should just sort of address that a little bit. We sort of say, you obviously worked across markets now. So how does it work for your organizations when it comes to pricing? Are you adaptable based on, on where the country can afford and then the affordability? Mohit, maybe start with you and then Rowan perhaps after that.
So I think I'll address the curriculum and the language piece first, and then I'll come back to the cost, because I think it's not just the curriculum and language. I think there's also the cultural aspect as well, which we take into account. So for example, if you're asking a child in New York, like a coach trip goes from New York to Boston, costs $200, and they're doing a calculation, but you're asking the same question to a child in Mexico, it's going from Oaxaca to Mexico City, and it costs these many pesos. So you would really localize that content for the culture as well. We started in the UK, and we picked math and coding for a very specific reason, because those are very horizontally or globally scalable subjects. When you're doing trigonometry or you're doing a Pythagoras theorem, it's the same whether you're in Kazakh or whether you're in London. So we quickly translated into US. We had a big success there. Bill Gates was writing about us in the annual Gates and Melinda Foundation report. And then we were very encouraged that there is a huge potential for a British product internationally. Then we had a client in Brazil that wanted us to have it in Portuguese. And we did that contract, and that was very successful. This is why we are in Brazil and big in Brazil now, because that was a good deal. But we learned a great deal doing that, because we realized that the cost of translation was just as much as making the first product in the UK English, because we were not very well prepared. But in the last 3 years, we have completely redone the model. We have written, so I think to answer your question about cost, we have taken the cost on our end. So the way that we have written our content can be highly translatable. It doesn't mean that if you're going into Russian or we're going to another language that we have to rewrite the whole content. It's done in different layers. So the technology protocol, or the stack, had to be redone so that the translation layer becomes inexpensive. So we are very well prepared now to launch in new markets or in new languages like Russian. We can also localize to Kazakh if there was an opportunity or a partner out there who would be willing to help and support us. But yeah, this is a good time for Manga High to be going into new markets.
Sounds good. Rowan, just your two thoughts on that.
Yeah, so very quickly, I fully agree with what Mohit's saying about culture. I mean, that's really, really important, as is kind of local knowledge. So, for example, Kazakhstan is incredibly diverse in terms of the culture in different areas of the country, in terms of the languages spoken in different areas of the country. And that kind of thing is really important, of course, to take into account. I mean, I suppose our strength as a British Council is our teams within each country we work in. So we have really, really strong local teams who know the markets, who know the education systems, and we can provide support for, not just for our own products, but for other UK providers who are keen on coming to these countries. That's very much part of our role. In terms of the cost, I suppose we're probably similar to many EdTech companies in terms of there is a part of the cost that is fixed and is charged to the UK. So if you take something like IELTS exams, there's the board fee that's fixed. That's paid it's the same no matter where the test is taken. And then there's the local delivery costs. And, that includes kind of the proctoring, the venues, that kind of thing. So, yes, but pricing does vary. And we're able to keep it affordable wherever. But, there's a section that's fixed and there's a section that's locally dependent too.
Very helpful. John, did you want to chip in very quickly on that bit?
Yeah, I would just echo that. I think technology makes everything a lot more scalable, and with more users, you have more cost-effective methods to deliver, to train, to manage your stack, etc. Translate, exactly as Mo had said. Building out platforms that basically are built for translation and cultural alignment. So. I think there's huge opportunities for companies like us that are doing well in certain markets to then translate that those tools into new markets. So it's in that sense a very exciting time.
Excellent. I think we're just out of time. I think we lost Greg, did we, along the way? But okay. I just wanted to thank all the panelists. I'm sure you all found it as useful as I did, and I probably just want to conclude by saying that Pobble, Manga High, GL, and of course the British Council are just one example of some great British organizations that we've got in the UK. They've hopefully demonstrated how we're making an impact across the world. But there, of course, if there are other areas that you perhaps want to delve into, we'd be very happy to talk to you about that. So you can, of course, approach the DIT people in your country and or BESA. We work very closely with BESA as well. So any questions about how to get in touch with British organizations, that's who to go to. So once again, thank you, panelists, and thank you, Almira, and the DIT team for putting this together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.